Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by more than 18,000 people from 137 countries and is supported by 349 organizations. I'm Stephanie Bode, the country contact in Germany, guest host of today's webinar. Today we have four wonderful women speaking in the webinar. It's April Halley from Canada, Suzanne Forbes-Vierling from the US, Thulasi Muttulingam from Sri Lanka, and Yeye Luisah Teish from the US. We are starting with April Halley now, who's a writer from Canada. Hello, April. Can you tell us anything about how Statistics Canada has been undermined and what are the implications of this?
Well, recently we had to fill out the census, and Canadians would have noticed that the variable of sex had been replaced with sex at birth and gender, meaning gender identity. So this is very concerning because, we're legally compelled to fill out the census. And so the government has, compelled us to go along with this transgender lingo, which doesn't really make any sense. Our sex is not assigned at birth, it's, observed. And it's also clear that their intention is to value the gender identity over the sex at birth variable. So that's pretty concerning. But I think even some people who are paying attention to this issue might look at that and think that, well, yes, they're using the strange lingo of sex at birth, but at least they're recording the variable sex so you can extrapolate data. And because this survey is put off by Statistics Canada. So I think people are making the assumption that standard using sex at birth and gender is true for all of Statistics Canada's surveys, but that's not the case. Some surveys will only record self-declared gender. And just a disturbing example of that would be crime. As of January 2019, sex has been removed as a recorded variable in crime statistics. So you're the only variable recorded now for the last 2 years is self-declared gender. So this is really concerning because data from the police is compiled into a survey called the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey. So this is the most important tool that researchers have to understand the characteristics and frequency of crime in Canada. So, and on a surreal note, no one has reported on this and the government hasn't made this information readily available, but the removal of sex as a recorded variable in crime happened in a collaboration with Statistics Canada and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. And they're still sussing out what surveys will record both variables and what will only record one. But in addition to crime, we also know that the cannabis survey will only record self-declared gender. And there isn't the same impetus to lie about your sex for cannabis survey as there is for the crime, obviously, but it's still a concern because we have recently, in the last few years, legalized cannabis. So, we want to know how this is affecting the population. And so it makes no sense to invalidate the data. There could be biological reasons or as well as other different reasons why marijuana use could be different between men and women. So, yeah, it's really strange.
And how has federal and provincial legislation been used to push gender identity politics in your country?
For about the last decade, there have been various legislation passed provincially and federally. So federally, we had the Bill C-16, which added gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Act. And also provincially, there are equivalents to that passed. So I think, and when you look at polls, there was a poll by Angus Reid, and it has had 84% of Canadians supporting gender identity being added as protections. But at the time, even myself, I've supported it. Like most Canadians support this because we don't know what the facts are. We think, and in that poll, as well as in the media and politicians, the examples that were given regarding protections on the basis of gender identity were related to housing and employment. So nobody in Canada wants people to lose their job or a place to live because of the way they dress or anything. So this is the mentality that people have. But as you know, the nature of how the legislation is being interpreted is quite different. And we can see that from the case. I'm sure many of your audience is sadly familiar with Jonathan Yaniv, a man in British Columbia who he dragged over a dozen female estheticians in front of a human rights tribunal because they perform female only services. They either travel to women's homes or have the client come to their home. Waxing services, and he wanted to have a female wax, even though he's a man, and he dragged them in front of the Human Rights Tribunal in BC. So that's the way it's being interpreted provincially, as well as federally. We had Bill C-16, and the Prime Minister personally intervened to make federal corrections. It's really surreal, which is the Correctional Service of Canada, allow federal offenders to be housed based on gender identity, not sex. So he made a big deal of changing this on the fly and forcing this issue. And I placed an ATIP about a year and a half ago, and it took a while to get the information, but it came out that 7 of the 8 men who had transferred were violent offenders. So it's really a surreal and really deeply concerning issue.
Is there room for women's rights campaigners to push back using the law?
Absolutely. There is a general everyone's just accepted the idea that gender identity tramples and trumps sex, and that's not true at all because it's actually unconstitutional. Sex is a protected characteristic in the Charter of Rights. So what we really need to do is make a case on that basis, and I'm really confident that we will win that. But and going back to Jonathan Yaniv, the defense in that the defense for the estheticians in that case, they rose the security of person is also protected in the Charter. That's really important, and freedom from sex-based discrimination. But because he was dismissed as a vexatious litigant, because he was clearly targeting ethnic minority women, the tribunal didn't actually address that issue. So that this issue hasn't been addressed at all in Canada. So this is where we have to go with this. And a case is really, really important to bring forward. It is a bit difficult. I think one of the ugly truths is that it's mostly at this point marginalized women, especially shelters and prisons, who have borne the brunt of it. And they have less access to legal help and stuff. And weirdly, too, the Canadian Bar Association came out in favor of men transferring into women's prisons. And there's also the complication that women in prison are afraid to go up against corrections while they're still under their, rule, because they don't want to face repercussions. But there are still, so a case can be made on prisons, on sports, on shelters from a variety of perspectives. But I'm really confident that that will come out in our favor and help this issue.
What role has the Canadian media played in all this?
These policies are clearly a Trojan horse. They're not what they were sold as. And, that couldn't have gone on. It's going on years and years now. All these things are happening. Women are being kicked out of shelters. Women are suffering in prison, including correctional officers. And the average Canadian has no idea that this is happening. So this could not have happened without the silence or complicity of our media, much of which receives federal subsidy. I think that's a strong reason why this has been so poorly reported. For instance, I only learned about this when I went on Twitter, and that's pretty typical of the women in Canada who are involved in it. I just happened to check out Twitter, and women in the UK were telling me things about Canada, and I thought they had their wires crossed. I didn't think it could possibly be true. But as soon as I started looking into it, I realized that, yes, it was in fact true. And it's really, really quite shocking. We're living in an inflammatory time, and I don't like to use that kind of language, but you really cannot overestimate how bad the coverage of this issue is in Canada. Canadians are totally in the dark. And when I tell them things, and even say I have an ATIP, you can verify it, they don't believe it. They say it's fake news. They really just don't believe that the government could be so rotten as to do this. So I think Canadians are in for a really big shock when they learn how, for instance, the first transfer of a man into a women's prison, he was described as a trailblazer, and it was this wonderful thing. And they don't report on the fact that there's sexual assault charges pending against a male offender who allegedly assaulted a female offender last year at the Grand Valley Institution for Women. And also there was a good example of how this works is there was a protest a few months ago outside the institution, and it was reported by the local paper, but then they faced pressure and criticism, and they immediately just memory hold it and took it down. So there really is almost zero reporting of this issue in Canada.
Now we are coming to Suzanne Forbes-Vierling from the US. Suzanne is a psychologist, writer, educator, and choreographer. And she will hold a presentation about racism inside the TRA/MRA space.
Wanted to talk about, American racism in the colonization of women. And from a lens of race, a lot of us as Black women, we look at this as a form of white supremacy and white nationalism. We experience it in that way. European American men declares now, so this is the framework that European American men declare that they're women. He keeps his power and privilege as the ruling patriarchy, and then he proceeds to legally erase women, conquer language, spaces, and organization, forces children to learn this ideology, and of course to go into medical surgeries, medicines, and different things like that. He is able to step into all the spaces that he dominates, forces us to see him as a sex and racial minority, constantly comparing himself to Black women and also to Black trans or to Black men who have a really tiny murder rate by proxy. It's as if he puts his hands into a bucket of melanin, rubs it on himself, and then he can declare almost racial minority status. And he has a convenience to step back into his power and control to punish how he perceives dissent. We are very, very sensitive and aware of the constant comparison to Black women. So this has its roots in Europe, who launched a huge campaign over several hundred years to justify the slave trade and the full colonization of Africa. What we are experiencing today is exactly what Europe and the United States has already done, a convergence of using religion, scientific pseudo-racism, sexism, the arts, literature, human zoos, the press, private equity, research in medicine, the Industrial Revolution, and government, to conclude with the Berlin Conference, where it was just decided we're just going to take the whole continent. We are experiencing the same identical campaign. This presentation, I have, there's nudity and there's description of rape and torture. This is Sarah Bartman, or Sachi Bartman, or the Venus Hottentot. And this was a Quina woman from South Africa who was trafficked to Europe, primarily in UK. And I think that she was taken to a few other countries, and her, in the latter part of her life was in France, I believe in 1810, she was brought to Europe. She was used in scientific experiments, displayed in zoos, where she slept, wore a collar, and was also prostituted. So she was, made to stand up on a stand and asked to dance, made to dance. People paid money, of course, to her traffickers. She benefited this part of the campaign, the colonization goals of colonizing Africa. And she also served the goal in adding to the subordination of the status of all women, including European women. This is Cuvier. He's a physician and zoologist, and he's the one that owned her and experimented on her and also participated in prostituting her out. He experimented on Sarah Baartman and published findings while alive and also post-mortem. Her pelvic region was of significance to Cuvier, who later proved, which later gave men today the opportunity to prove their justification for entering womanhood. The belief that the femur strength of Black women was sturdier and firmer, more so than white men and white women. This is something that white transgender or white men in the United States repeat often. This is their justification for colonizing women's spaces. As you can see, Saartjie Baartman is, her body is here on display in a museum in France. She was left on display, nude, her body dissected, body parts dissected, and she's remained that way on display for 150 years. And then her nation, representatives from her nation came to bring her back home. But Europe exploded at the sight of a Black woman's body, her curves, and all of that was the excuse. Here is Charles Darwin and Johann Blumenthal. They both talked about race and IQ. Darwin emphasized that Black people were the lowest on the human evolutionary scale, closest to apes and orangutans. And he then extrapolated that to saying that Saartjie Baartman and Black women and Black people were closest to apes and orangutans, the last of humans to come out of that evolutionary process. And Johann Blumenthal took measurements of brains to say, okay, to determine IQ. And just as a quick side note, the term Caucasian comes from Blumenthal. He named white people or Western European people after a Georgian sex slave that was trafficked. He thought she was beautiful. He thought her skull was beautiful. So he said, I'm just gonna name all Western Europeans Caucasians. That was his classification system, one of them. Europe and United States both published that Africans were just barely human. In the meantime, European men knew exactly who they were raping and impregnating. They knew that Black women were not apes or orangutans, but it was a media marketing campaign to say, you know, well, we're justified in going to Africa because Lord knows they need us. They're barely into human evolution. We know how that feels today because when we read how lawmakers publish things about us saying, oh, you're a TERF, you're against trans kids being in sports, blah, blah, blah. We're all left saying, but that's not true, but wait. And we don't have any power to change it. It's the very same way that Africans had no power to change all what was being said about them. So as you can see, the European man, the African man, and then the gorilla or monkey. And once things are written down, it becomes true. Using a Black woman for scientific inquiry killed two birds with one stone. The bell curve was able to say, well, IQ, now this bell curve is a more modern, book that went around the world, quote unquote, proving Black intellectual inferiority. And Darwin talked about women being inferior to men on multiple levels. President Thomas Jefferson, a businessman, a hustler, a pimp. That's why I picked a picture with him in his little fur jacket. Everybody talks about him in a different way, but this is what he was. Everything that we're all worried about today, Jefferson did to women, to Black women. Black women were classified as chattel, surrogacy, forced surrogacy, baby sales, sex slavery, lactation, medical experimentation. He tried to corner the market on baby manufacturing, tried to keep it to Virginia, for Virginia to be a wholesaler of slaves. He was unable to do that because men all throughout the South already owned women, Black women, so they did not need to wholesale people, children, babies from Virginia. He then created the bond market, which was a debt that one could take care of by betting on the reproductive systems of Black women. This is how Sarah Baartman was advertised. And as you can see, this look of Black women for entertainment, like, you could be rewarded in this way. And Europe and the United States talked about the Black woman as untamable, sexually aggressive, and so forth. So you can see from then, from the 1700s, 1800s to now. Today, overall, everything that has happened to date is what I say the Trojan horse white patriarchy or white supremacists use to justify to enter womanhood. When I say white supremacists, I mean on the left. The use of Sarah Baartman's body and the biased framing of scientific findings was a perfect storm for today, man who feels justified in entering womanhood, especially after erasing us. The intimation is that Black women, due to anatomy, were barely above the evolutionary scale as human and as women, more like animals. And this is said often, that white women are the standard and that white women allowed Black women into womanhood. This is a belief, and therefore, since white women, supposition is therefore, since white women allowed a type of woman that's barely above the evolutionary scale of an orangutan or a gorilla, and since science proved that men, white men, were anatomically the same or softer and more refined, then men are justified into womanhood. Justification for continued colonization and rugged imperialism in Africa and with women. They're like a parallel, it's a parallel situation we're experiencing now. They have an attitude of take and do what you want. There is a continued justification for medical experimentation. Like during slavery, all gynecology comes from experimenting on Black women, African-American women, slaves. We went through a period of eugenics, forced sterilization, and today we have biopharma and the forced transitioning of children. We have this, there's this mentality, there's this climate, it is very surreal, of rape culture. Genitals don't matter. Just out of nowhere, they simply declared that. And also the procurement of gender-specific poverty-based services. A lot of women are pushed down into poverty, and all of these poverty programs make a lot of money off of our exclusion from the economy. Now I'm going to show you a Twitter thread, and this is everywhere. I could have put up 30 threads, but I'll just do this. And I'm scared to click the link, so I took screenshots of it. So this is a daily, almost hourly, constant merging of Black women with white men. Here, feminist frequency thought they were cute, trying to put out a shout out for the Women's History Month. Trans women, Black women, all of the women who have fought and continue to fight for the rights they deserve. It's Women's History Month, we celebrate you. Okay. Then a response. A disgraceful racist tweet comparing the long and bloody fight for civil rights to males who want to self-ID as women. This is totally despicable. Then Aardvark, I love her response. Keep Black women out of your racist mouth, because this is how Black women, this is how we talk to each other about all of this stuff. You know, we're all in secret and private spaces. So this is Rebecca, this is a man. I really don't see how anyone can see this post as racist. It's stating the truth that to this day, trans women and Black women have to continue to fight for their rights. TERFs are not feminists. And so Asia just straight out, stop using Black women as a way to push cock into womanhood. I love that one. So Cyan says, Black women are women, so men are women. Their logic stinks of misogyny and racism, like race makes anyone more or less female. Oh my goodness. Then here is a painful one. Sale Grover asks the original poster, what are your thoughts on this? And she embeds a comment. Seeing a Black TERF on Twitter is weird because how are you oppressing a trans woman and talking about your oppression when you're a monkey, N-word, slave with no right? Okay, that is disgusting. Then Chris chimes in and boy, is he right. Modern day, what he means is liberal feminists are not your friends, ladies. Then the famous artist Birdie Rose, I think is her name. Her artwork is beautiful. If they're not adult human females, they're not women. Trans women, Black women, what a joke. Why are these men always trying to pretend that being a Black woman is the same as being a man? It is racist, you know? So that's why I went back to Europe to kind of to really show you how that came to be about. Now I'm going to show you a compilation of blatant pseudoscientific racist comments, just random tweets from all over. So it's a compilation. Here is Arian. If even Black women can be considered women, why not them? African warlord, I love her or him. Are you saying Black women aren't women? Please, I want you to say this with your chest. Here's another one. If you hate trans women, then you hate Black women. All the arguments you TERFs use are the exact arguments used to segregate Black women in the 60s, the exact same way. You want to hurt the mental state of hundreds of thousands of people? This is in response to someone saying trans women are biological males, we deserve our own space. Now, I'm going to pause on this one for a second. This is a white man telling people that they're being discriminatory in trying to, saying that it's light segregation. And he's the one that created Jim Crow. He's the one that created segregation. He's the one that put all these laws in place. So the gaslighting is like pouring 4 gallons of gasoline on the flame because it's so painful. You want to say, by the way, you're a white guy. You're the one that created all of these problems that you now use as if you're experiencing them and as if you're a part of the history with Black women going through all of this. Here is a response to this tweet on top. Hey, you're racist. Women of color are not a subset of women. Trans women are a subset of men. It's your problem, deal with it. Julie goes, women of color are a subset of women and trans women are a subset of women. And the response from Moana, wow, no women are a subset of women. They are women. It's an all-encompassing category. We've all been in these fights. Here's Akon. Black women produce way more testosterone than white women. That's a scientific fact, which makes Black women look manly and behave manly. You may never know if a Black woman is actually biological female. Black women and masculine trans women are both manly looking. Bella, I am so tired of this shit. A trans woman will never be a biological woman. As man evolved out of gorilla orangutan status, they were able to have more biological differentiation. Black men and Black women were still down below. And I remind people that, all Black American and all Caribbean people have a European man's last name, right? So white men knew that they were with their slaves. And here is another one. Here in the civilized world, we stopped calling Black people names like coon, nigger, ape. A long time ago, calling a spade is seen as degrading, hurtful, and belittling. In other words, let's be polite, but they still are coons, nigger, and ape. I'll jump over to sports. Here is Florence Griffith. We all grew up with her. We love her. Incredible athlete. In the 70s and 80s, the whole concept of the firm hip, the strong hips and the strong femur resurfaced as all these Black women was just smoking it in the Olympics, just flying past everybody. And sports commentators used to say, boy, her hips are really strong. They're almost as strong as horses. So Black women during the Olympics, early on, it was hinted that Black women had the femur strength of horses. And I remember as a little girl one time, they put a horse race and then they put the sister on the camera and had them running and saying, look at that, it's almost near identical. So there's that, making that association. I just want you to just take a quick look at this chart. This is in many studies, bone density, race by sex. So they looked at all four, Black man, Black woman, white man, white woman. And this more fuchsia line that you can see is representative of Black women. And the more royal blue, hopefully I get the colors right, the names of the colors right. The royal blue is for white men. And as you can see on the age chart below, they kind of match and overlap to a certain point, to age maybe 55 or something like that. This is the scientific proof for what white men say all the time to justify their entree into womanhood. Fallon Fox, I don't know if we remember this man. I forget the woman's name. They got into a match. He said, hey, I'm a woman. And he beat her almost to death. They had to pull him off of her. She is permanently disabled, never seen since. She said she never felt anyone more strong, never was in a match with someone that just felt very, very different than what it felt like to fight other women. Fallon Fox told everyone, Black women have the same bone density as white men. So as you can see, white men use Blackness as a shield. Here's Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas, some more incredible athletes, gymnasts. These are beautiful young ladies and tiny little things. I think Gabby stood next to Shaquille O'Neal. She come up to his knee, I think. It was hilarious. And then we have these wonderful flowers of, these men truly feel that they're like Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas. I know it's different sports, but they truly feel justified in crushing these women around them, these young girls around them. And it's even doubly painful that they're, it's all nationalities, but, the visual of them stepping on these brown girls and Black girls, it's very painful. I was going to say something about Fallon Fox. He wanted to kill her. He said, by beating up a Black woman, I wish they did not pull me off of her because it proves my femininity by just trashing a Black woman. And they had allowed me to kill her because it proves my femininity. This is very painful stuff. So my presentation is coming to a conclusion. I just have to put some Black women winning so everybody could see it. We know Venus and Serena. Allison Felix, I think she still holds a record for the fastest woman, I think. And of course, we end.
So we are coming now to the third speaker, which is Thulasi Muttulingam from Sri Lanka, and she's a journalist reporting on post-war issues. So Thulasi, can you say something about the situation with gender identity in your country? How did you realize that it was a threat to women and girls, and who is promoting or opposing it?
So Sri Lanka is a small country in the Indian Ocean close to India. Our ethnic makeup is mainly Sinhalese, Tamils, and Muslims. We have some other minorities as well, but it's mainly 70%, 70-odd% Sinhalese. Used to be something like 20% Tamils, but 30 years of war, pogroms, etc. So many died, many migrated. So we are about 13% now, and about 10% Muslims. So that's the background. We are far removed from the Western world in the sense that we are not yet institutionally captured. However, there are some brackets of people absolutely taking this forward. And I think we owe J.K. Rowling national applause, like, global applause actually, because what she said burst it out into the world. In far-flung pockets, we heard about what was happening. When that whole thing happened, that whole cancellation of J.K. Rowling, I had no idea what was going on. I just saw a lot of social media activity where friends were burning their Harry Potter books, screeching about their lost childhood. And these are heteronormative people talking about how she's a transphobe and they'll never get over it. And I tried to follow up and find out what she had said that was so transphobic. And when I looked at what she had said, obviously there's nothing transphobic. So I actually reached out to these people causing a ruckus here and asked, could you tell me what exactly is the problem? And I meant it sincerely. I just wanted to learn from them. I thought they might have a point. I just wanted to know. And then got faced with this typical woke rhetoric of educate yourself. You are the problem. If you don't understand, you are a transphobe yourself. Some trans people are going to kill themselves or get murdered just because you asked this question. All these sort of things, that just a lot of accusations, no concrete answers. Or if I say, this is what she said, right, what's wrong with it? It's like, oh, she said something else, somewhere else. We can't be bothered to find the link, you go find it. So I did months of solid research and I couldn't find anything. But all the media sources that were writing about her were saying she was transphobic. But then if they actually quoted her, there was nothing transphobic in her quotes. And I just didn't even understand, because we have no idea about gender ideology such as it is, like what was happening here. And I should say I come from a genuinely transphobic country, as in trans people here suffer the literal form of transphobia, where they are killed, raped, thrown out of their houses, employment discrimination. We have got the whole gamut going on here. So I was obviously pro-trans rights, and I have been a pro-trans rights activist in Sri Lanka for nearly 10 years. So I was inclined to believe that this might be problematic. I wanted to know what was problematic, and I couldn't find anything in the reports. And obviously there's a lot of word salad thrown in. When I asked activists what the problem was, a lot of jargon, a lot of big words. And English is not my first language, but I am an English teacher. I do have a fairly good command of the language. I just couldn't make any sense of these word salad. And I used to send it out to friends of mine who are by now senior editors in the media industry. And I would ask them, can you make sense of it? What does this mean? And they also took the line, it seems profound, maybe we just don't get it yet. And Judith Butler, someone sent me Judith Butler text, and I spent about 2 weeks trying to figure that out. It took a long time to figure out, there's no sense to this. They just really took us round, but I finally figured it out. And I think what happened was that they have this thing about turf, I heard it too. So then I went on Twitter and just to search for turfs. And that's when the GC feminists came up, and I started following them. And then it started making sense. Okay, this is what's happening. And it was quite a massive shock. So Sri Lanka right now, we have just the typical woke crowd who are pushing this, which is a minority elite brat pack. However, because they come from elite families, they are mostly millennials in mid-managerial positions in the government and non-government sector. They have said that they are pushing this ideology forward as a progressive policies. We don't know that the government has actually taken it on board, And some friends of mine were telling me that I should stop it because as far as I know, I'm the only openly gender critical feminist in Sri Lanka right now. And so there is a huge backlash. I am called this transphobe turf. And even my friends are concerned that since it is a genuinely transphobic country, the vulnerable trans people might get caught in the backlash. So I was told to tone it down, and their justification is, look, the government is not progressive anyway, so they will never bring this ideology in here. But my answer to that is that this is not a progressive ideology. It's a regressive misogynistic ideology. And we have a regressive misogynistic government. As soon as they figure out how easy it is, we are going to be in trouble. And we need to wake up to that.
What affects women's lives in general in your country? Where does your government stand in terms of women's rights?
Extremely misogynistic, as I said. So we have one of the lowest political representations in South Asia. So neighboring countries, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, they all have Afghanistan. They all have double digits, at least 10 to 30% representation of women politicians. We have 5%. And every time we campaign for more representation, the government's one trump card is Mrs. Sirimavo Bandaranaike. In 1960, she was the first female prime minister elected in the modern world. And they still bring that up to tell us, we were way ahead of the West in bringing in a female premier. What are you talking about? We don't need to do anything else. So there are a lot of women's issues. We had a long drawn out civil war. Men died or migrated. So the women are now about, officially on statistics, they are saying 52% of the population. I think where I am, which is much more war affected, my gauging is around 60% of the population. And the women are left to be the breadwinners as well as caretakers of home. They have the double load on them. And there's no infrastructure development, policy development to address this, that they had not traditionally been brought up to be the breadwinners. It's a very patriarchal country culture where they were supposed to stay at home and take care of the family and kids and cook and clean all day. Now they had to go out to work and do all this at home. One of the main things the women ask for, they ask for simple things. They ask for daycare centers to leave their children while they go to work. That has yet to materialize, and we are 12 years past the end of the war now. So even simple things that women ask for, no one takes any heed of it. And we asked for political representation, campaigned for a long time. Only about 2 years ago, they brought in 25% representation in local elections, not the national elections. And even that was at the final level. They didn't allow many of the strong women candidates to go in. They just filled it with their mothers and sisters and girlfriends. And those women are obviously puppets. Like I have tried to interview them as a journalist. It's like, oh, my husband said, why don't you join? So I joined. I have no idea. They are openly saying that. And then that is also used against us, that these women are seen as weak. They are not actually, well, they don't actually know about any policies. So when that gets out among the people, the argument is, see, women don't know anything. So why did you even campaign for it? However, nationally, the three main industries that are keeping Sri Lanka afloat, our number three, first, second, and third industries, the garment sector. So worldwide brands have factories in Sri Lanka to make clothing, but the women are paid an absolute pittance. Then tea industry. Sri Lanka is famous for its tea, and the tea pluckers are mainly women. Foreign remittances, again, mostly from women who are going to the Middle East as domestic workers. So these three are the main industries that Sri Lanka is economically dependent on. The government acknowledges that. But all three industries are hugely exploitative of women. They pay around $100 to $200 per month for round the clock. It's not a 9-to-5 job. A domestic worker in Saudi Arabia, for example, will get 2 hours of sleep. That's it. And for that, she manages to send $200 per month home. Tea pluckers have been campaigning for something like $10 a day. No, sorry, $5 a day. And this has been going on for years and yet to materialize. The government keeps saying, oh, yeah, we'll give it. We have gazetted it. We have done this. We have done that. So because when the media follows up, the argument is we are doing something. But 3 or 4 years down the line, The salary is still very, very poor. Again, garment factories are a whole other boat of exploitation and low pay. So all these things that directly affect women are not even looked into. Just about 5 years ago, we had a male minister in charge of women and children's affairs. So we had hundreds of ministries. As being a small country, we don't need that many ministries. But the government at the time was trying to consolidate power by keeping male politicians satisfied by giving them various portfolios. And obviously male-dominated cabinet. But at least at one ministry for women and children, couldn't it have been a woman minister? And when that question was put to him, his answer was, well, you know, women are not really tolerant of other women. They will fight and, you know, they are jealous of each other. They will not serve each other's best interests. So it's best to have a male at the top. My deputy can be a woman, and I know best what's for, I can do what's best for women. And that kind of thing we had as recently as 5 years ago. So misogyny is not even, it's not even underground. It's like open and bubbling up.
Are you part of a feminist organization? What are you working on now? And tell us about other women's rights or LGBT groups working specifically to support women and girls in your country. What work are they doing?
Right. So homosexuality is still illegal in the country as per the statute books. We are still operating on, we were once colonized by first the Portuguese, then the Dutch, then the British. So we have Roman Dutch law and British law on paper still. And so a law left behind by the British 200 years ago, criminalizing homosexuality, is still there in the books. And every time campaigns reach out to, you know, remove it, there's a backlash from the clergy or some segments of the population, and they keep it. What they are saying though is that what the governments have said is that in recent years have said is that it can't be used to jail people, but still it's there in the books. And LGBT people are mostly underground because the culture is also heavily, you know, and homophobic. That's one, but there are LGBT organizations, LGBT organizations as well. And what I am active in, I'm a professional journalist, so I had to subscribe to this notion that you couldn't be an activist at the same time. That's what we are trained as a journalist, you can't be an activist. But over time, I realized the women's rights situation was so bad in the country. I am part of women's rights groups, and I am openly a feminist and a women's rights activist, for which reason some male readers reach out to say, you know, if you ever write on women's rights, and I'm one of the few women writers exclusively concentrating on writing women's issues and bringing it out, because otherwise it doesn't get covered at all. And they reach out and tell me, I wouldn't trust anything you write because you're so obviously biased. And so that's how women's rights gets covered in the country. I used to be a mainstream reporter working for national newspapers. If at all we had a women's section in the newspaper, it would be a male editor calling the shots on what to put in there. So the women readers were never asked, what do you want to read? The women journalists were never asked, what do you want to cover? And usually it would be just some very silly thing like go and interview that actress on her beauty routine. Now, so many burning women's issues in the country, and the national press doesn't have time for it. And the covers of these sections, I remember working in on a desk where we managed to sneak in various articles that were of interest to women, and women were reading it. But then they complained because the cover would be of a half-naked model in a risk process. And this is a culturally conservative country. So women readers were complaining, look, this is supposed to be a family paper. I'm embarrassed to have this paper in front of my children. What's with that cover? And we reported to the editor, it's a women's section. Women are complaining about the cover, but it's like, you know, they don't even take that on board. The feedback is not taken on board. We decide, and that cover is typically geared for a male gaze, and it's the women's section. So I am part of a network called Women's Action Network in Sri Lanka. So we have branches all around the country, and I am in part of the Jaffna branch. So though men make a lot of jokes about women not being able to get together, they actually should take a leaf from from how women actually network, because this is a deeply racially divided country due to the civil war and politicization. But across this ethnic and highly politicized divide, the women reach out to each other. So there are Sinhalese mothers whose sons were in the army and disappeared, networking with Tamil mothers whose sons were in the Tamil guerrilla outfit called LTT, and they disappeared. So because they understand these were warring factions, and these are mothers of the warring factions, but they have a good network and solidarity with each other because they understand each other as women. And so women fight for different things in the hill country, which is Kandy, where they might be fighting for the tea pluckers' rights. Over in Jaffna, they might be fighting for various issues related to post-war issues that the women are facing. But every time a solidarity action network is needed, women travel all over the country, show up for each other, and picket and protest for each other. And yeah, it's really lovely to see.
So we are coming to our last speaker for today, which is Yeye Luisah Teish from the US. She's an author, storyteller, activist, and elder in the Ifa Orisha tradition of the African diaspora. And she will hold a presentation about rainbow flag imperialism and trans tyranny and their impact on the human rights of Black women.
I want to begin by saying Alafia. And Alafia is a greeting in Yoruba, wherein I am wishing you good health and peace with your neighbor. I also want to say that I am a Black heterosexual woman who has been an ally to the gay community for about 40 years, and an Iyanifa, a high priestess in the Ifa Orisha tradition of the West African diaspora, which becomes important as we progress in this presentation. As far back as 1966, I was in college in Oregon and the only little Black thing in the psychology club. And there came a weekend when the head appointed us to various places related to the issue of psychology. Who little Black girl got appointed to the Oregon Primate Center, monkey, where I found a man there with 2 cages of pregnant monkeys. And he explained to me that the monkeys in this cage were carrying generic males and the monkeys in this cage were carrying generic females. And he was interjecting the opposite hormones into the placenta at a certain stage. When I asked him why he was doing this, he said it was pure research, and I left because there's no such thing in the hands of a white man as pure research. Our history tells us that pure research is done on us monkeys, Black people, as Suzanne's thing has shown so clearly, okay? The work that I'm presently doing now came into being because of a Facebook post, okay? I had been trying to dispel some of the misinformation about Yoruba tradition on my Facebook page. And then there came a day when Bruce Jenner made the front of the Vanity Fair cover, and somebody posted that Bruce Jenner was more woman than Serena Williams. That was when I cut Bruce Jenner a new asshole and pointed out the racism in that statement, okay? And in the backlash that came from that, my life was threatened. My online classes were boycotted to the tune of $9,000. And, you know, at various times I had to stand up for my right to hold woman-only events. I stand on my right to hold woman-only events, to define who woman is and to do what the hell I see fit to do. Okay, so what has come out of this is because of the hassle, in our tradition, we seek divination to find out what the ancestors and the spirits want us to do. But when I sought divination to ask what was my proper place in relationship to this, the goddess Oya, who is the queen of the winds of change, our warrior queen, said, Osa Oworin, expose the underbelly of this thing and stand your ground, okay? And so when people come to me who think that they are trans, I send them to another priestess who says she's been identified as the person to deal with such people. Then I wrote the article, Patriarchy in Drag, Sexual Imperialism in Africa and Delusional Revisionism in the African American Community, for the Female Erasure Anthology. That's the image of Oya, the goddess of the winds of change, okay? And she destroys stagnation and brings about unconditional change, okay? It should be said that this trans issue is being addressed under the direction of Oya, and the basic message is that we have to fight this thing because it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable, okay? When I talk about rainbow flag imperialism, okay, I would like for to say that sexual imperialism is manifested in a number of ways, which Suzanne has explained exquisitely, okay? It has meant that non-European people have been the targets of European fantasy, projected desires, guilt and shame, and scientific surveillance and experimentation. In the contemporary moment, sexual imperialism also looks like the campaigns that the US religious right has fermented in Africa to encourage religious intolerance toward homosexuality. It also looks like rainbow flag imperialism, which the brother who Professor Ibrahim Farah defines as, he says, both the US religious right and the mainstream LGBT movement tend to ignore the indigenous forms of sexual and gender diversity that existed in Africa for millennia. The religious rights efforts depend upon the colonial roots that Christian missionaries planted in Africa centuries ago. The mainstream LGBT movement's efforts depend upon the neoliberal capitalist roots planted by multinational corporations and NGO missionaries who are now exploiting all of us behind their greed. You know, at this point, they're really pressuring African nations into accepting trans ideology, including gender surgeries, which is a 20th century European invention. We never had it in Africa. Sex trafficking and pedophilia, with the threat of withholding vital aid and services if they do not comply. Now, what is really, really hard to take is that the amount of pressure that they're putting out on these African nations to accept this foolishness is causing them to overreact and to institute laws that are more severe than anything that ever existed before. So, for example, right now in Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan has declared that people can be arrested for walking gay. And the churches, the fundamentalist churches there, are encouraging people to attack gay people on the street, to beat them up, okay, while the white boys, basically the white boys who want to be women, which they can never be, okay, are imposing themselves and their will upon Black people. It was very, very painful for me during one of those Facebook arguments to see such a white boy holding up a Black baby, and he took a picture and said, "I got me one." You know, that's the kind of foolishness that Black women have had to put up with in relationship to this whole transgender issue. Now, I want to talk about delusional revisionism in the African community. African-American community, okay? It is being perpetuated by the mainstream media, which tries to tell us that traditional African society was always transgender, non-binary, and a host of other selective statements that they make, okay? These days, some of this is due to the misinterpretation of something that was said by a very popular West African priest, Molly Doma Some. Molly Doma said, but at least among the Dagara people, gender has little to do with anatomy. It is purely energetic. The whole notion of gay does not exist in the indigenous world. That does not mean that there are not people who feel this way that certain people feel in this culture that has led them to being referred to as gay. The gay person is looked at primarily as a gatekeeper. Any person who is at this link between this world and the other world experiences a state of vibrational consciousness, which is far higher and far different from one that a normal person would experience. This is what makes a gay person gay. You decide that you will be a gatekeeper before you are born. So when you arrive here, you begin to vibrate in a way that elders can detect as meaning that you are connected with a gateway somewhere. Now, what has happened is that a lot of people that I encounter have taken Molly Doma's comment and skewed it because they don't know the culture, and they say that he's saying that, oh, everybody's transgender. I would like to clarify, as a Yoruba priestess, okay, to say that the Yoruba people have a post-birth ritual that spells out the future of the boy or the girl after 9 days of birth. It's called an asentaye. The sex of the child is chosen by the spirit of the child before they leave the land of the ancestors. In some societies, the child is seen as genderless in the social sense until their rite of passage. But we look at who is born and we say, this is a boy, this is a girl, and we're having the asentaye. Until the puberty rite comes up, the pronouns are not he and she. In fact, in Yoruba society, once a set of adults have a child, they are identified by the name of the child, not even by their own gender. Should a boy fail the test of manhood, such as wrestling a female buffalo, crying at his circumcision, or failing at warrior skills, he may be relegated into his own society, sometimes known as Adodi, and sent to live among his own kind, and to dress like a woman, learn the skills of a woman, and to marry a man to act out the same gender roles. The horrible surgery, which essentially neuters a person, is a 20th century European invention. We understand that the sky is androgynous, that is, it is regarded as male with a female element within it. The ocean is gynandrous, regarded as female with a male element in it. If men are the sun and women are the moon, there exists dusk and dawn, the children of twilight. This is the balanced binary. Such people are often called into ceremony at specific times or seated in the back of the congregation. There is no such thing as non-binary, gender neutral. It does not exist in African society. What you're looking at here is the Gelede masquerade, wherein men dress in the costumes of women to celebrate the power of women. And it is often done as an apology for unruly male behavior. I served a man who had to dance Gelede to appease the spirit of his mother, who cursed him on her deathbed. So this masquerade here is not a put down of women. It is not men who think they are women. It is men who are acknowledging the power of woman. Now, these boys who want to be girls, these children of the twilight, cry that they're two-spirit. And that's a gross insult and a thief of our Native American kindred's culture. I am a member of the Mother Earth delegation of Indigenous women. And the Native American women will tell you this stuff has nothing to do with them, and just the fact that they just steal the term two-spirit is ridiculous, okay? In our traditions, in the traditions of the West African diaspora, we claim two-headedness without respect, to the body of the person. If I am a child of an Orisha who is a male Orisha, when I am possessed by that Orisha, I am both a human female and the male spirit, and vice versa. But at the end of that possession, you return to your normal self, okay? It only happens during a ceremony, and at that time, you are both human and deity. Further, people just declaring that I'm two-spirit or declaring that I'm two-headed is some more bullshit, because this is achieved only through initiation, not self-declaration. We have women's societies and men's societies. Most importantly, the respect for women and the attack on women's spaces is totally unheard of, okay? The most powerful of these is the Iyami. The Iyami is the society of older women. They're considered to be the mothers of the world, and even the king of Yoruba land has to have them there in order to be crowned. So this business of interjecting themselves into women's affairs, claiming spiritual superiority, all of this stuff that these boys in the twilight are doing is totally inconsistent with African belief. What is very, very hurtful to me is what I call trans tyranny. Black women are being disrespected and attacked. I've encountered young women who are afraid of the word binary, who parrot the trans rhetoric with no examination of what is actually being said. And worse, Black women's jobs are threatened if they do not agree to trans language. I'm told that calling a person by the pronoun that fits their sex is a hate crime. I want the act of calling me a nigger bitch to be a hate crime. Let's take all these people to jail if that's what we're gonna do. I refuse to be labeled cis, to call my vagina a front hole, or to participate in the other delusions. Recently, I've seen articles denying the severity of the plantation with a claim that buck breaking never happened. Buck breaking was a situation where, in addition to the rape that was done to the women, a man who stood up was tied across a tree trunk, and the master lined men up to rape him as a demonstration of his powerlessness. So now you have people saying stuff like, oh, buck breaking never happened, that was imaginary, and oh, by the way, Harriet Tubman is a fictional character. I watch television and I notice on Fox, the shows that come on the Fox channel repeatedly show a very masculine Black man and state that he is trans and state that we're standing up for them and, oh, we accept you. It repeatedly shows Black women as pitiful, prejudiced beings whose children confess to their white teacher that I can't talk to my mama, so I have to tell you that I'm trans. And this is a deliberate indoctrination of the Black community, backed by the ability to take people's jobs, backed by the ability to brainwash your children. And what I'm really concerned about is when these things become law in the midst of fighting for all our other rights. For a while, it can look like this trans issue is not important, but wait until. Do we have to wait until it is too late? Do we have to wait until our children are being trafficked? Because this is connected to sex trafficking, it's connected to human slavery, it's connected to pedophilia. In the article in Female Erasure, I cite how certain medical facilities are actually sponsoring and observing rapes. It is really absurd. You know, Black people are once more monkeys in the cage, like Sarah Bartman, being experimented with. And for the people who say, well, what about Black trans people? I say, if a Black man stands in front of a mirror and he sees a white woman, that's his right and his problem. In truth, we have an ode for how to heal people who don't like what they see in the mirror. He can have his problem, but what he cannot do is demand that I see the same thing or change who and what I am to accommodate him. I am a woman in a woman's body, and I love it. We need protection from trans tyranny.